So we have both the Chessbrahs together now with the world #1 Magnus Carlsen. Is there actually like a Chessbrah house?
Yeah.
There is.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
What I wouldn't give to to be there right now. Meanwhile, Magnus Carlsen going for the Maxim Vachilik-Rav approach of snacking up during the game.
Tara gets it right. And here we go. Yay. And I am the first one with the right move, you guys. Yay. We have started. This is the Champions Chess Tour 2023.
But here we go. Robert was also correct with his prediction of the Catalan. So you two take the points. Tanya, we need to up our game.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Good start. Good start. What are we seeing on the board, you guys?
So this is one of the main lines of the Catalan opening. This is played by a bunch of top players in the world. Seemingly everyone has it in their repertoire right now. White tries to occupy some of the center, but black is rock solid. Look at black's pawn structure in the middle. It's what we call the triangle pawn setup, just controlling lots of squares. Black does have one problem piece in these positions. It is that black bishop, the light square bishop on c8. It tends to struggle to get out. It's often a battle, the middle game that we will be about to see, of whether black can activate that piece. And this is still very well trodden, this path. What do you guys think? Who's this going to favour style-wise?
Well, Magnus, we saw him employ the Catalan so much in the World Championship and ever since then in the match against Jan Nepomniachtchi. And it seems to suit him really well. I think the fact that he's chosen such a mainline theory against Sarana, it shows a lot of respect for his opponent as well. The Catalan, you can't fault that line. We see it super trendy at the high level. I think it's a very wise choice by Magnus taking on someone as strong as Sarana.
And I think Sarana has played this very well. We're still in standard opening fair, but this move, knight bd7, the last move played, developing the knight, is less common than simply castling the king. So that may seem like an innocuous move, but it begs the question, what is the idea? Is there something slightly different, a nuance, a wrinkle that Magnus has to take into account? And I believe, David, that's why he's thinking.
Yeah, it has forced Magnus to think for himself for the first time in this game. He could, as you mentioned there, Robert, just automatically castle the white king to safety, just say, OK, what is your idea? That would be going back to more typical waters. But is there a difference? Now Magnus Carlsen adapting to this rapid format. He spent a long time, over a minute, on a very standard position. I'm predicting that he will castle his king. I just don't see what else for white, simply. But Magnus, will he come up with a more creative approach?
Well, knight d7, as you mentioned, isn't the most popular move. In fact, black does go shock castle instead, which is perhaps what Magnus was expecting. And to just give you some perspective, we've got over 450 games in shock castle and just about 100 games with this move that Sarana has chosen and blitzed out. Shows good preparation from Alexey's side. Now, once again, Magnus could decide to go shock castle, which is the most popular move in this position. About 158 games here. Or play the move bishop f4, as I can see in my database, with only 2 games. Magnus is definitely in a new position right now.
So these seem to be the two most logical moves, either castling, the most standard approach, or bishop to f4. I would be shocked if Magnus didn't castle. I guess the idea behind this one, Tanya, is to free up the square on d2 for the white knight. But there we go. We see on the live board he has played it, getting ready to park the knight on d2, which is actually its dream square. And after black castles, I would be shocked again if Magnus doesn't go for that. But now knight bd2 would support a pawn push. And looks like on my board we've seen something really creative from Magnus. It hasn't popped up just yet, but this would be what I would go for if I were white. Let's go back to the players and what has Magnus got up his sleeve?
Well, you said creative, so I'm guessing it's Harry the H-pawn.
Yep.
That must be it. And it comes from the school of Daniil Dubov. Dubov was one of the trainers for Magnus Carlsen during his World Championship matches. And Dubov is kind of the king of the Catalan. He loves this opening. He plays it with great effect. So the move h2 to h4, throwing that pawn up the board. It doesn't have an immediate threat, but it just can be a bit scary for black to deal with.
We see it.
Yeah, there you go. Robert, he's definitely been hanging out with Daniil Dubov a bit too much recently, Magnus Carlsen. The white king now has the question to answer long term. Does it castle short? Does it castle on the king side now that you started pushing pawns on that flank? Or do you just stay in the center, keep your opponent guessing? That's something that Kaya has mentioned in the past, especially last season on the tour. It's a definite trend at the top level to keep your opponents guessing, to kind of play a bit risky and leave your king in the center. But yeah, the idea is clear. You want to start stepping forward even further. You're staying very flexible with white. And if Sarana isn't careful, maybe a kingside attack a bit later on.
And you definitely have to watch out for that. This is ambitious play by Magnus, and we see Sarana go for the option of b6, still keeping flexibility in the center. At some point, I am expecting a pawn trade to try and open up some files. Your opponent goes for the flank attack. You try to open on the center, try that uncastle king, put pressure on that. And as the pieces develop, I think the way for black here, David, is often to just take out the bishop on c8, get it to b7, trade the pawn on c4, pick that pawn up, put your knight on d5, and try to create play in the center as long as white's king is not castled.
Yeah, so this looks like it's a very logical plan. Instead, Sarana has developed his bishop. And, OK, we're waiting for Magnus to move now. What do we think? Is he going to castle? Is he going to decide? Is he going to go left, right, kingside, queenside? Is he just going to leave it even longer and maybe advance his pawn in the center? So many questions. It does look very kind of surprising to me that Magnus has gone for something this provocative. It feels like just castle your king, you know, play all the simple moves first. It's the first game of the day. It's a morning round. But what do you think of this, Robert?
Something I like to point out is that knight on d7, right in front of the queen, it's dominated by the pawn on d4. So when there's a pawn 3 squares away from a knight, the knight is in some trouble. So I do like the contours of the position for white because that black knight's a bit passive. So playing the move e4, it's very common, it's a topical idea, but you offer some trades, and that's usually good for the side with less space. That knight on d7, the knight on f6 fighting for the same squares, called superfluous knights, thanks to Jeremy Silman. So I do think we'll see a series of trades, and the knight on d7 will become a happier piece.
Yeah, finally the knight can start to breathe, and it would have a nice square. It could attack the white queen, for example, but OK, what has Magnus Carlsen done? He didn't automatically recapture. Let's go back to the game, because I was certainly expecting an automatic take on this e4 square, but instead of capturing this pawn, Magnus says, no, I'm going for the attack. He brings his knight forward. Of course, this pawn will disappear long term. It's now attacked 4 times. The white bishop is open towards it, but he's also hinting at a potential attack on this square. Look how the queen's vision, long X-ray vision there, is potentially going to hit the h7 pawn. And Sarana doesn't even blink. He's playing so quickly against this really creative idea. He plays c5. Again, if your opponent attacks one side, fight back in the center.
But the bar is really liking it for Magnus.
Yeah, the evaluation bar, we should mention on the side there on the left of the board, up on white's side.
Yeah.
Surprising to me, especially considering Sarana is playing so quickly. Feels like he's in his home preparation somehow, but we've got to trust the engine from time to time.
And the speed with which the players are blitzing out their moves, it seems as if they know what they're doing, but this is a brand new position. It's never happened before. So they are playing over the board. This move by Magnus going knight to g5, attacking on e4, and now he blocks off the center, blocks off that bishop on b7. This pawn advance is a very typical way of getting back to the position after black has made the move c5. You want to keep it blocked and you want to keep pressure on e4. I like this approach of not allowing black to capture on d4 and opening up the center.
Yeah, he's opening it in a way that could potentially be favourable for white. He's saying, OK, we can open it up, but on my terms. And what do we think? Is this involving a second pawn sacrifice temporarily? Maybe we have to jump in and show some lines here, Robert.
I think so, because it looks like after d5, black has that square under control. You can start taking that pawn on d5, and that has just happened. E takes d5 was played. White has to take back with the pawn. And if we get some trades on that square, white will then castle queenside at long last. And black will be up 2 pawns, but white has the initiative. The momentum is in the favor. There's a pin down the d file. The e4 pawn will be hanging. Maybe there's some better moves along the way. Maybe castling king was now strong as just bringing the rook to d1. But either way, we see how quickly white's pieces come into the flow of the position.
Yeah, and just to go 1 or 2 moves further, if the black bishop drops back, we can, for example, take this pawn simply with our bishop. And look at this, already devastating threats on the board. This is a huge threat of checkmate. The black king not entirely safe. And actually, I don't really see how to prevent this. This could be really dangerous already. And this is the current position. Of course, we're waiting to see if Sarana does take this pawn. There is a threat, however, of stepping forward 1 square to trap the black bishop. So already huge questions for Sarana to answer.
Wow, what a start, you guys, to the 2023 season. Magnus Carlsen maybe about to castle opposite sides.
Yeah, looks very likely.
Yeah, that's going to bring some action. Now, we want you guys at home to join in the conversation, to join us here in the studio. And you can do so either participating in the Twitch chat or by tweeting us using the hashtag ChessChamps. We want to hear your questions, your comments. We want to know who you're rooting for. And we want to see your selfies as well. So share them using the hashtag ChessChamps. And actually, during this tournament, the Air Things Masters, every day we're going to give out an Air Things device to one of you sharing a selfie on Twitter using the hashtag ChessChamps. So go ahead and show us your face. We want to see it.
Yeah, and talking of faces, we see Magnus in deep concentration right now on the camera. He, I think, is trying to hide his excitement here. Magnus, for sure, he's got in a brand new idea. You mentioned earlier, Tanya, we've never seen this position before, and he's used it. And really, kind of, it's, of course, an important game, but Sarana wouldn't have expected this. He wouldn't have been expecting Magnus to go straight for his throat. Surprising stuff.
Surprising stuff, but I think Magnus is super happy with the way the opening has turned out. And we've been talking about this white pawn on d5 and how black can capture it. It might be the only way forward. David, this threat that you pointed out of d6, and look at this, Sarana chooses another path of vacating a square for the bishop on f6 with the move knight to h5, and the bar hates it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bar hates this move. We have to try and figure out why. Of course, it's not just because knights on the rim are dim. That could be one explanation, of course, but it must be something concrete, something specific to this position that makes the engine hate this last decision so much by Sarana. I'm trying to figure it out. It feels like white has a bunch of ways to create a double attack, but no, Magnus just takes a time out and drops his bishop back. What do we think of this move?
The problem was it was a one-move threat. The knight attacked the bishop on f4. The bishop simply slides away from the attack. And this pawn on e4 is going to be won by white. If you try to push your pawn up from f7 to f5 to give it the pawn its best friend, another pawn, then the e6 square is vulnerable. The knight can simply hop in there. That wins some material for white. It's a fork that wins a rook for just the knight there, so white would have the edge. So I feel like knight h5, it kicked the bishop back. The question is, then what? I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't think Sarana knows the answer to that question either. Normally, if you create a threat, your opponent answers it, then you should be able to quickly show the rest of your plan. But yeah, as Robert says, this looks like a bit of a one-mover. And suddenly, white will capture this pawn with any piece. You can take it in 4 different ways next move. And again, the threats persist. This king is about to come under a huge attack. Looking good for white, I've got to say. And sometimes we disagree with the engine, the evaluation bar. Sometimes it's hard to understand why the computer says certain things. Here, it's quite logical, I feel. Black's pieces just don't look ready for the action in the center. Most of them are passive, and the only piece that stepped away and out of the first 2 ranks is this horrible knight on h5, which will be forced to retreat at some point to a more defensive square.
But has it gone all wrong for Sarana here in the opening, or do you think this is part of his plan?
I think it's gone completely wrong for him because Magnus has control over the position. Sometimes you have an advantage, but there's only one series of moves that leads to that edge. Here, all of white's pieces are on great squares. Black is one piece activated, like David said, but it's on the rim, not doing much. Now the bishop slid away. So I believe with only one pawn to his name, and that pawn is likely to fall soon, this is not a good position for Alexey Sarana.
Yeah, and I think he's starting to realize the seriousness of his issues here, his problems. He's been tanking for a while, and wow, Robert, he goes for the move you suggested. Logical, but it does come at a cost, and Magnus jumps in instantly. He doesn't hesitate to drop his knight on that beautiful e6 square. That is a fork. You've got to move the queen. The queen was the more valuable of the 2 pieces. She runs away, but here Magnus, again, spoiled for choice. That white knight is so glorious, so beautiful. Do you even trade it for a rook? Yes, you win material, but maybe you want to keep it on that square. We call it an octopus knight with its tentacles all over the board. That white knight is a real thorn in Black's side, and I wouldn't be shocked if Magnus just ignores it, just castles queenside and says, OK, the attack continues.
And Black always has to watch out for a g4 break. We see this pawn chain in the center, this e4 pawn being guarded by this f5 pawn, and you want to break that. And has he gone for it?
Tanya.
He does it. He does it instantly. Robert, he doesn't care about the king's safety. He says, I'm coming for your king instead. g4, and I see the eval bar loves it on the board. This has exploded already, hitting that knight, hitting that pawn. If you capture on g4, all white wants is to take on e4 and hit that pawn on h7. And it's really all about the black king. That knight on e6 is way worth more than an exchange.
Yeah, this knight is one of the most beautiful pieces I've seen in a while. And Sarana, he's facing an attack. He's about to drop some material. It just looks I mean, I want to say hopeless, but not quite yet. It does look really difficult for him, though. The only alternative to that is dropping back the knight, but that's an admission of defeat. You've kind of wasted a bunch of tempi with that knight move, and there'll be ideas of hitting the black queen with the bishop. There'll be ideas of just taking a pawn, opening up a line for the white rook later in the game, and just the problems, they're adding up. They're building, and no salvation here.
It's one of those moments I think you have to take the pawn and pray.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to take what's being offered to me and hope I can survive it. It's not looking good. As we're noting, the e4 pawn will drop. You can at any moment take this rook on f8, but you don't need to do that. But if we do a quick material count, that's the thing, is currently white would be down 2 pawns. You're likely to win one back right away. And even if you do eventually take that rook on f8, it will be a minor piece and 1 pawn for a rook. That is 4 points for 5. That's not an insurmountable lead, at least in terms of material. So there are chances for Sarana. He will need to play more quickly, and he'll need to trust himself a little bit. But thus far, he has gotten himself in huge trouble.
Yep, huge trouble. And as Robert says, you just got to limit the damage. We've all found ourselves in these situations where we get kind of attacked in the opening. It all goes wrong. We just have to find ways to survive. Look for any defensive resources that you can find. And Sarana, he tends to be quite good at that. He's quite tenacious as a defender, I found, when studying his games. So he'll just be looking for ways, as Robert mentions as well, to part with material in order to survive. The longer you survive, the more confidence you build up, and maybe the more frustrated Magnus will become. But now down a couple of minutes on the clock as well. And with that only 3-second increment that we see in this new season of the tour, it's going to be a real struggle for him. All the pieces still on the board. Only a few pawns have disappeared. So still very tense, still some chances. But he needs to speed up.
Magnus looks anything but frustrated right now. He is definitely enjoying this position a lot. He's got everything. It's like a dream Catalan for him. The opponent has got about 6 minutes. Sarana down to 6 minutes on the clock. A really difficult position to defend already. This has gone all wrong for Alexey.
It's not looking good on the bar or on the clock for Alexey Sarana in the first of 4 games. In the other matches, we could see the evaluation bars roughly to the middle. So more tense start maybe in the other matchups.
Yeah, it does look like maybe the bar is slightly in Nakamura's favour. Yeah. That was a really fascinating game. We'll keep you guys updated if the results come in there, and we'll mention some highlights a bit later. But yeah, this one looking difficult. What's your philosophy, Robert, Tanya, when you're really struggling, when you know your opponent's almost got it in the bag, but you have to survive, you have to fight back?
Robert, do you want to take this one?
Sure, I will. I'll take this one. I think that Sarana is a speed demon. He is really resourceful when he even is down to his final seconds. He has great experience in rapid and blitz time controls. So at some point, he's just take what's offered to him and run with it. He did just take this pawn on g4. He is up 2 pawns at the moment. It's not like there's an immediate checkmate or even an immediate devastating threat. So his position is worse. He acknowledges that. You can see it on his face. But it's not that terrible. So as long as he can shore up and prevent the immediate threats, he does have a chance in this game. And we see Magnus just take this pawn on e4 with the bishop, creating a threat against the h7 pawn. But the evaluation bar is taking a little bit of a dip. A knight can come out to f6. There is activity for black's pieces, and that's the best news of all.
Yeah. And at least his next couple of moves are very natural. He did bring a knight to f6 as a bit of a defensive rock there. Black's knights, superfluous perhaps, but they do control and defend, cover some really important squares. Magnus eventually, after resisting the temptation for a few moves, he has gone to grab the material. So white has won that rook for his knight. He's currently 1 point up if we do a count. But yeah, it's more about the piece activity. White has nice centralization. Black needs to just lock things down. And I like this last move by Sarana, planting the black bishop on d6, the dark square bishop, blockading white's central pawn. You cannot allow that one to advance. It would be too strong. It would win the game. And he seems to have done a good job of at least covering things for now, holding things together. Do we think Magnus has a breakthrough now, or is he just going to improve his pieces, as we see in front of us?
I love that approach. He's already up materially. He just brings the last piece into the game. Bring all your toys to the nursery, as they say. And rook to e1, centralizing it. David, as you were talking about the approach in such difficult positions, I think your mindset just has to be to survive another move. Yeah. You just have to make sure that you're not losing on the spot and keep pushing your opponent to find ways, because the hardest thing in chess is to win a winning position. We've seen even Magnus sometimes not being able to do it. So that is what Sarana's trying to do. He's trying to keep himself in the game, but it's going to be hard, this one. I like that white is materially up, and it looks like white has all the compensation as well.
Why is it hard to win a winning position but easy to lose a losing one?
Chess isn't fair, that's why.
I was yelled at by Henrik Carlsen, Magnus Carlsen's father, once in a polite way because I asked him something about Magnus. He only needs a draw. And Henrik said, it is very difficult to get a draw in chess. And of course it is. And it must be even harder to, as you say, win a winning position.
Yeah, all of these guys, they're super strong. They're here for a reason. They're all beasts, and they all defend extremely well. I think that's what sets the modern generation apart from past years. Thanks to engines, we've all learned that there are resources in positions, and especially the young players, they're so resourceful. And Sarana still fighting back, still struggling perhaps objectively, but at least he started to advance pawns towards the White King. I do want to mention just a couple of moves ago, the experience of these two, especially in speed chess, has shone through by the fact they both put their kings towards the corner. Black took a timeout to shuffle his king into the corner. Magnus, even though he's the one attacking with white, took a timeout, put his king on a safer square. And that's just because later you don't want to have to calculate checks, attacks, and direct threats. But talking of direct threats, that rook on e6 now, the white rook has landed on a square that the white knight used to occupy, but still an outpost, still defended by white's passed pawn in the centre, and of course by his bishop. And even if black trades off that rook, it will just be replaced by an equally powerful pawn.
Magnus has so many intruders in the black camp right now.
Yeah, and those intruders are only going to start eroding the black position further. This last move is a bit of a sad one.
But I love it, though. I mean, from the defensive perspective, you can't trade pieces. You're just going to lose any endgame. You are down material. So rook d8 threatens, in a way. I put it in air quotes because it's not a big threat, but bishop sliding back to its home square, hitting the rook on e6, and the bishop on f5 behind it. So all of a sudden, he's putting up sturdy defense. He's much worse, perhaps objectively lost, but he at least is keeping all of his pieces connected with one another, and that doesn't allow Magnus the knockout blow.
Yep. Actually, everything's defending each other right now. These knights are kind of clinging on to each other for dear life. This bishop, the blockader of that powerful white pawn, it is well defended for now, well fortified. I do wonder if Magnus can start upping the pressure. I'm not sure whether you have time to bring your rook, kind of park it, doubled rooks there. Instead, Magnus centralizes his knight. Wow, nice move. And adding even more pressure onto those two kind of most important defenders. Exchanging pieces as well, as Robert mentioned, helping when you're ahead on material.
Yeah, I love this move, knight e4.
Very strong.
That knight on f6 with the spin on the d8 rook, you just want to get rid of that and your task becomes that much easier. You're also hitting that bishop on d6. That's how you're fighting against the threat of bishop to c8, as you were mentioning, Robert. And I think everything that Magnus has done so far seems like flawless play.
Yeah. He just seems really relaxed. I've never seen Magnus like this in the mornings. Normally he takes a while to warm up, but he just looks really relaxed. And using this opening idea, he's never let Sarana kind of get a foot into this game. I was talking about getting off to a fast start earlier. Sarana shaking his head. He's normally ice cold, emotionless and fearless, but Sarana shaking his head there. He has played bishop to f4, trying to trade off these pieces, perhaps, these bishops. Will that help him? This pawn has also been freed up to start advancing in the near future. Not right now, perhaps, but some calculation to be done for Magnus.
Bishop f4, you can also start thinking about doing all kinds of trades on f6 and really taking black's defenses away. The g4 pawn will fall, the h7 pawn will be not defended. I'm expecting a bunch of trades of these defensive resources that Sarana has with these two knights.
And meanwhile, we do see the bar has swung in Nakamura's favour against Gukesh.
Something big has happened there.
Yeah, some big developments potentially in that game. And, of course, we've seen the bar all up on white's favour in this game, too, for a long time now. And Tanya predicted the future yet again. And a capture of black's defender, that knight on f6. And it is replaced, but that knight, the second knight, will also disappear any second now.
The two biggest favorites could be about to get a perfect start to the Air Things Masters, Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. The bar is also going up for another small favorite, we must call him that, Alireza Firouzja against Arjun Erigaisi in the first game.
Yeah, Alireza definitely the favorite, at least on paper. He's high rated in classical chess. Arjun had a terrible event in Vaikonze. He didn't win a single game. He lost a number of them, but we know what he's capable of. So when Arjun Erigaisi finds his form, he can definitely combat Alireza Firouzja.
Yeah, 100%. And also, we haven't seen Alireza that much in action. Where is his practice coming from right now? And these kind of formats just demand you to be on the go from the very start. Of course, Alireza had a very comfortable going in with the Swiss and the playoffs. But Arjun, we've seen him on the tour before. And what's interesting is that I don't remember these two teenagers playing against each other.
That's
so
interesting.
This could be the first time this matchup is happening. And Alireza was one of the first in this generation to sort of break away. He was world number 2, and I mean, far ahead of everyone. But he sort of inspired this younger generation to come forward. And this change of guard, this movement that we're talking about, Alireza was right in the front of it.
And especially with your fellow Indians, Tanya, with Gukesh, with Arjun Erigaisi, with Pragnananda. There's so many of them.
Yeah, and to think that they're all the same age, it's kind of hard to imagine. But at some point, you felt like Alireza broke away and went a little further and sort of just giving these other youngsters this inspiration that they can do it as well. And now to see these two fight against each other, I think it's going to be a big match. It doesn't matter who's stronger on paper. Arjun's going to give a big fight. He's also super good in these speed chess, faster formats.
Yeah.
And, I just love the fact that Firouzja, in the play-ins on Friday, he was playing from his kitchen. And, I'm curious to follow him a bit later. I wonder if he's following the same recipe for success. But meanwhile, Magnus planting that white queen in the centre. Black's bishop is plugging all the holes. That dark square bishop now for black, but it could be removed at any moment. First, Magnus gobbles up a pawn. He's getting ready to throw the white f-pawn forward to destabilise that black bishop in the centre. And this one looks like we're coasting now towards victory for Magnus Carlsen.
And that queen, the white queen, was over near the king. Now it's going near the enemy king. It just took a pawn. It's going to slide up on the diagonal and go after the black king on h8. Queen h5 threatens checkmate on h7. It also allows the rook to land on e8 in many positions. It protects that square. So this is a big problem for Sarana. I think he is completely hopelessly lost. I don't say that very often as a commentator, but this position, he's getting obliterated in this one.
Yeah, and just to highlight the idea that Robert mentioned there, for example, if bishop takes pawn is played, white can even give up his rook for that strong bishop in the centre and now create that threat. Those dual threats, actually, firstly, checkmate on the h7 square, but now that this black rook has been lured away from the e8 square, the secondary threat is just as devastating. And this could spell game over. At this point, it's hard to offer any advice for Sarana. He might as well play a move such as this one and ask Magnus to prove the win, to show the win, because it's inevitable at this point. You just need to find the most testing way for your opponent. It's looking hopeless. Also down under 2 minutes for Sarana. What does he play? He pushes a pawn forward. This doesn't change anything, however. He's looking for counterplay. He's pushing pawns towards the white king, but he's so far away. He needs 3 or 4 moves to create a single threat, and Magnus will land a punch before that.
And now that he's allowed the d pawn to stay alive, David, that pawn can actually go forward to d6 and also threaten the rook coming on to the 7th rank. So let's say you start with the move queen h5. It's on the board. You're threatening a mate in 1, and Sarana has to defend that with the queen, losing control of the d6 square, after which, let's say, queen goes to g7, defending the mate on h7, and a move like d6 would be absolutely devastating, coming in with the rook on the 7th rank, and this is checkmate incoming. Sarana's down to 1.5 minutes, and the clock is not even his biggest problem.
Oof.
Yeah, we saw it in the camera a minute ago. He was just rubbing his eyes. He's like, what's happened? This has just been a powerful display by Magnus, and we can't fault Sarana at all. He's just not really been given a chance in this game. It's sometimes happens against the top guys in the world.
Yeah, he was in an unfamiliar position, and Magnus was on the attack. Sarana felt uncomfortable. He brought his knight to the rim, and it never quite got back in the game, except when it was traded off the board in a winning position for Magnus Carlsen. So this is dominance. This is the world #1 player for over the last decade. He's showing his force in game 1, and he's about to lead 1-0. I think resignation incoming.
Yep, I think we have the result. Magnus did get his rook to the 7th rank, and Sarana has resigned.
Wow, 32 moves, and it's over. Magnus Carlsen, he takes the first punch, the first point in the quarterfinal match against Alexey Sarana. The Russian will have to make a comeback. He will have the white pieces in game 2.